Welcome back into Sports Radio, WNML.com. I'm Eric Kane with Joel Silverberg. Week 14, a lot of action across the NFL. Let's dive right down into it. Joel, Thursday Night Football, the Titans smoked the Jags 30-9, and it was an absolute career game for Derrick Henry, who has just been kind of absent all season long.
Yeah, going back and forth with Dion Lewis and Derrick Henry in that backfield, trying to figure out who is the lead back in there. It was supposed to be Derrick Henry's coming out year after backing up DeMarco Murray. He decides to call it quits. The Titans don't bring him back, and Derrick Henry just hasn't had the season. And man, Thursday night, it seems like he exercised a lot of demons and let out a lot of frustration with a 4-touchdown night. The crowd tried to get him a fifth. They eventually sent him back out. He wanted Lewis to get more carries, but a great night overall. Poor tackling by Jacksonville throughout the evening, but still, it takes a great effort to be able to do what Derrick Henry did, and he did it in prime time, and the Titans are still in the playoff race.
238 yards rushing, a single game franchise record for the Tennessee Titans. Derrick Henry now owns that. Again, like you said, had a chance to get 5 touchdowns, had 4. But when you look at Derrick Henry now moving forward, is that his absolute ceiling? I mean, obviously, I don't think we'll have another game like that in his career, but do you think that can motivate him moving forward to kind of take over that lead back role and then have Dion Lewis more as a complementary back role?
It could certainly set your confidence in the right direction. It just depends on what Matt LaFleur wants to do with the offense and how they want to execute that, because Henry is viewed as a power back because of his size. He actually likes to bounce it to the outside and get in the open field and run outside the tackles and get in space and run. And so I think where Dion Lewis likes to run between the tackles because he likes to use his short size to hide behind linemen and sneak through holes and everything. So it's a little bit the opposite of what you would expect it to be. But yeah, I think it could set him in the right direction, give him some confidence moving forward. But I think he does need to start getting more touches. He seems to be one of those backs that does better as games goes along. If he can become that back where you can give him 20 carries or so a game, it could be a very effective running game. And part of the issue has been the blocking schemes of changing. Taylor Lewan and Jack Conklin were talking about this last week. Going from the smash mouth style offense to a zone blocking scheme has kind of impacted the way that they've adjusted. That's why the offensive line has struggled at times. It doesn't help that those guys have been so banged up throughout the course of the year. Dennis Kelly getting the virus earlier. They haven't had healthy offensive linemen, but the new blocking scheme under Matt LaFleur has probably added to that. So you're not running this smash mouth offense that you were running a couple seasons ago that had some success.
Tennessee, they need to win out, finish 10-6, to have a hope at the playoffs. Obviously, a favorable schedule down the stretch, but the Giants are playing pretty well now. We'll talk about that in a minute. But, last week, the Ravens, they did lose. The Broncos did lose, but the Miami Dolphins won on a walk-off. And the Colts, they continue to win. So how does this playoff picture look to you in the AFC?
Well, Tennessee controls its own destiny in terms of beating head-to-head with Indianapolis. They both have the same record, and they'll play each other Week 17. So if both teams win out the next 2 weeks, that matchup will essentially decide who gets second place in the AFC South. Now, whether that decides a playoff spot or not will depend on what the rest of the conference does. You've got 4 teams that are tied at 7-6 vying for that 6th seed. Of course, the Chargers, a 10-win team, sit at number 5. So the Ravens after the loss, the Dolphins after the win, all 4 of those teams, the Dolphins, the Ravens, the Colts, the Titans, are all 7-6. Tennessee has lost to both Miami and Baltimore. You're going to need both of those teams to lose again and Tennessee to win out. That's the easiest path to get to the 6th seed for Tennessee. Now, you can always hope the bottom falls out for Houston, Tennessee wins out, and Tennessee's able to win the AFC South. That would be ideal. The Titans would host a playoff game in that scenario. I don't think that's likely. The most likely scenario for Tennessee is you beat the Giants this week on the road, you beat the Redskins at home, you beat the Colts at home in Week 17, and then probably most likely, if you're going by percentages, the Dolphins go on the road where they haven't played well this season and lose to Minnesota, and then the Ravens lose at Los Angeles to the Chargers next week in Week 16.
You bring up the Titans' next 2 opponents in Washington and New York. Well, New York, then Washington, and they actually squared off in Week 14, and it was all Giants. They toppled them 40-14. Or something like that, but they beat him pretty good. And the Giants starting to look like a better football team. Eli Manning's coming around, he's playing better. But when you look at Washington, down to their 3rd string quarterback, they signed Mark Sanchez. He threw the ball only 14 times, 2 of which were picked off. They bring in Josh Johnson, who hasn't played in the football game.
They might try Josh Freeman though.
Hadn't played in the football game since 2011. At some point, are we going to see Colin Kaepernick back in the league? And, I mean, if it ever is a situation, it's got to be in Washington right now.
I think Washington, with the state that franchise is in, with what they've had to go through already, the Reuben Foster incident, I think for Washington, they don't need the media circus that would come with Colin Kaepernick. And maybe that's not fair to the Redskins, and maybe that's not fair to Colin Kaepernick,
Yeah.
but I think already with what's kind of surrounded that franchise over the last couple of years, maybe that's not the team that needs to be the one to give Colin Kaepernick a shot. Will West brought it up yesterday on Sports 180. He thought that the Jets would have been an excellent situation to bring in Colin Kaepernick after Sam Darnold got injured instead of using McCown. So there are some franchises where I don't think it would be a bad idea because let's face it, if the NFL is willing to allow Reuben Foster to be signed right after an arrest, you should allow Colin Kaepernick in the league. I think a team could eventually take a chance on him. The other downside to it is that now he's been out of football for a while. So he hasn't played in a while. Now, Josh Johnson hasn't either. So, but there are still other free agents out there and recent college quarterbacks that are still coming in that have been playing that teams may want to take a look at. But I don't know if it was worth it for the Redskins to bring in Colin Kaepernick and have to deal with all the off-field issues. That's just not the team that needs to do it, in my opinion.
We'll say in the NFC, the Panthers, they can't buy a win right now. They've lost 5 straight. And, what's going on with them? What is the reason for their struggles? And, they're on the outside looking in now. They're at number 7, looking at an NFC playoff picture. Do you think they make it in? Still a chance to get in with some teams ahead of them, 6-win teams ahead of them in the wild card?
I don't think so at this point. I think right now you lost 5 straight. I don't think you have a lot of confidence. Then you look around the league, the Seahawks are likely going to grab a wild card spot with an 8-5 record after the Monday Night Football win over the Vikings. The Vikings are still 6-6-1. So technically they have a half-game lead over any team that's 6-7, and that includes Carolina. And right now I can't have faith that with what's going on with Ron Rivera and his team right now in Charlotte that they're going to be able to get that turned around, because you're expecting to make the playoffs at 9-7, and the NFC bottom's kind of fallen out for a lot of teams in that conference, so it's going to be up for grabs just like it is in the AFC, and you might see an 8-win team get in there, but I don't think it's going to be the Panthers unless they can turn something around miraculously in the last 3 weeks of the year.
Time for our playmakers of the weekend. Of course, 2 guys shined brighter than most. Derrick Henry on Thursday night with a franchise record 238 yards rushing in a single game, 4 touchdowns on 19 carries. Derrick Henry, what a game there. And then I would assume you might be going to Amari Cooper.
Yeah, I would also throw out the Bears defense. So just for the sake of throwing out another argument, what they were able to do. Now, really questionable play calling by the Rams throughout the course of that game. Todd Gurley, you can count the number of carries he had in the first half on one hand. Wasn't getting involved in the passing game a lot. Especially they didn't go to the run really at all. They didn't commit to the run at any point in the game despite Jared Goff throwing as poorly as he did. But credit to the Bears defense because that's a huge win for them to keep them in front in the NFC North. But I would say Amari Cooper, the 3 touchdowns and what he was able to do in the fourth quarter and overtime alone, the 75-yard touchdown reception, the game winner in overtime. If you had him in fantasy this week, might have turned you around. I had an opponent who did in a playoff game where I was beating him by 30 and Amari Cooper scores 55. And I'm not bitter about it at all.
Well, how about them Cowboys? They look like a completely different team now. That winners of 5 straight, and that Amari Cooper deal looks like it's going to pay off.
And the rest of the NFC East looks like it's in flux. You've swept the Eagles this season. There's no way that they can beat you. The Giants are eliminated, essentially. They still can get in a wild card scenario. Somehow it actually is still mathematically possible with the Giants being 5-8. They've won 4 of their last 5. The Redskins losing Alex Smith and then Colt McCoy. It has set up well for the Cowboys again to just backpedal their way into the NFC East. Now, they do look like a legitimately good team now, so it's different than in years past, but it always seems like the stars align and not just on the helmet for Dallas.
He's Joel Silverberg. I'm Eric Kane. Week 14 in the books. We'll talk about Week 15 next week here on the NFL in a Flash, Sports Radio, WNML.